Generally, we don't like to get into a conflict situation. We like to be nice to people. We say yes a lot. And,
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Amrit.
Amrit. Alright, we are Amrit and Amrut from CoreVoice, and we do this thing where we talk about books that we have read which the other person has not. And today I have this book called Difficult Conversations: How to Discuss What Matters Most by three authors, Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton and Sheila Heen. What book do you have, Amrit?
I have never split the difference. Chris Voss's book, he's an FBI negotiator and he wrote this book about negotiating. It's not set up as contract negotiation or job negotiation. It literally could be an everyday conversation where you're trying to get someone to do something for you. So that's.
Is it more like tricks to manipulate others to get work done?
No, not really. Some of them you could call them tricks, but it's more about how you think about a conversation with someone else. There's a concept called mirroring. There's a concept called labeling. The part that I like the most is the chapter on saying no, or the idea of, or the power of no. And really what Chris Voss says is that the negotiation starts when somebody says no. And he says that if you think about it, when somebody says yes, because we don't like to get into a conflict situation, we like to be nice to people, we say yes a lot. And,
Yes.
Yes. And the issue with that is that, I'm trying to cross-guess what that yes means, but if we were to create a space where somebody could easily say no, then they would say no more emphatically and it would be easier to move ahead.
But it's interesting because when they do this on theatre, improv theatre, in which it's the exact opposite.
Yeah,
where
yes and.
if you say no, then it like you have to agree to something that the other actor is doing so that it goes ahead. And you're saying that in negotiations it's the other way.
So Chris Voss talks about this at a point where he says that definitely you have to get the other person to agree to something you're saying. So, but the idea of avoiding these yeses is more to avoid the fake yeses, the yeses we are saying to please other people. I'll give you a real life example. I've had this experience this year where a founder was asking me, hey, do you like this idea or this direction that the company is taking? And I was like, no, I don't. I don't think it makes sense at all.
Did you say it like that?
I said it. I said, I don't think this makes sense at all. And then the founder says to me that, okay, what's the alternative? And I'm like, I don't have an alternative. And the founder then says that if you don't have an alternative, you have to like what I'm doing. So you have to agree. You are agreeing by default. Now that's not a space where he's ready to hear.
But how is that a negotiation, by the way? You said this book is about, but
Correct.
you said it's
So-
also about general communication.
Yes, and in the context of that conversation, what the expectation was that from the founder was to get my buy-in, and I didn't want to give my buy-in because I didn't agree to the plan.
Fine. Why is this book called Never Split the Difference? I mean, I don't connect the story that you said with. It's like when you go to a restaurant and the bill comes, that's Paula, my dog.
Paula's very excited.
Paula, yeah, avid reader.
The part of the book where he talks about splitting the difference comes in a later chapter. It's fine. I get what he's saying. He's saying basically that we tend to be in this half win-win, like you take this, I'll take this kind of situation, which ends up being a sort of a settlement sometimes. Like, okay, fine, let's agree to this. And he's saying, don't do that. Get to the best position that both of you want. If there is one chapter somebody wants to pick up it, you should pick up the chapter on mastering. The chapter is called Beware of Yes and Master of No, chapter 4.
So Difficult Conversation is also by authors who work, I think, in something called a Harvard negotiation group. I didn't read it for business purposes. I just wanted to understand more about family communication. There are three kinds of conversations, as per this author. The what happened conversation, the feelings conversation, and identity conversations. And most of this book talks about, because we think if someone says something, we have to respond to it without thinking what is the kind of conversation that is happening. And once you get better at that, you become better at knowing how to play your cards, when to listen, when to not react, when to use logic, when to not use logic. This book obviously says that the same thing happens in negotiations when if your two people are negotiating on something, you might think, hey, let's go with this rational discussion, but without gauging the other person. They don't want to do this because they have felt hurt. No rational. So I mean, that's the book. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm just going to repeat it for my sake. Did you say there are three kinds of conversation? There's a rational conversation, there's a feelings conversation,
And
there's an identity conversation. Is there a context in business or in our workplace that every conversation has to be rational?
Not at all. Not at all. Most of us assume that we make rational decisions, we look at logical arguments, but we are all emotional human beings. And if you are stuck with identity, if you feel that, these guys, I want to show them that I can succeed, you are emotionally charged, then maybe you are using all your rationals and logic to justify that mode you are in. So it's an awareness. Once you're aware, and especially noticing the other person, it's not just you. Some people might be doing business for 40 years, but the way they are reacting to certain things is because they want to prove a point. And once they want to prove a point, you have to say that, hey, I think you have made a great point. Often in man-woman conversations, I feel now that I'm so much better at understanding it and breaking it. And definitely in online conversations, or this whole right wing and left wing, it's so obvious at one point that it's not a logical discussion for most part.
Identity discussion.
Yeah.
Mostly.
So if you really
let me ask you, let me just go back to a point, and I want to bring up something from Chris Voss's book also. You mentioned in the middle that the issue is that it's not a science experiment. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's no correct way, and so on. And I'm thinking I'm going to try and prove a point. So this is that kind of a conversation. Yeah. So one thing that I like about this idea of no is that when you're doing an experiment, when you're doing a marketing experiment, or when you're doing a sales experiment, you recognize that say you try 10 experiments, one may succeed and some may fail. So I love the fails. I love it when the experiment says an emphatic no, it didn't work. I hate the ambiguous ones, that there's neither yes nor no, and you don't know where you are. Should I repeat it? Should I try it again? What do I change? And I'm thinking even in conversations where you're able to tell, this is the kind of conversation I'm having right now, this is logical, and this is say identity, but many times you're in the middle, right? Like you don't know. What does the book say about navigating those?
So among those three, if it's clear that it's an identity conversation, someone is being challenged, you want to solve that first. The logic and the rational is the last. Unless it is very clear that, hey, I have heard you, I am not challenging, like that part is sorted and you show that the other person has been convinced. Then comes the feelings conversation. The feelings is also like one specific aspect of identity where I just want to be heard, and your feeling has been heard. I absolutely get it. And sometimes you don't want to continue if you think that we need a gap. If these two are hovering around, and then logic is immaterial, because if smart people are good at logic. What happens typically if the other person is not as smart as you, they definitely feel very cornered. It's easy to have a heated debate when two people are intellectually at the same level.
But even if two people are talking at the same intellectual knowledge wavelength, and one person, if I'm being very logical about it and you are not, or you are in a corner where you want me to acknowledge your identity or your feelings, then the logical argument just doesn't work.
So these were two books which you guys might want to check out. Maybe if you check out one book, then the other book would be a little redundant, but whatever. One from Harvard, one from where you said? Negotiation?
FBI.
I think FBI sounds cooler. Go with Never Split the Difference. And I think that's a more popular book. This one is little random. I randomly picked it. This author, I think one of them, maybe Bruce Patton, has also written a much more popular book called Getting to Yes.
Absolutely. So Chris Voss references Getting to Yes multiple times.
These are all basically same pairs. All right. So that we had a difficult conversations, and hopefully we won't split the difference post this video.